I was telling someone in a presentation the other day, can y'all hear me okay? Yeah. I was telling someone in a presentation the other day that engagements like this combine two things I'm good at, nature and talking at people. So this is really a great opportunity for John Michael. So I'm glad to come and speak today. I'm speaking today about a grant project that LNPS funded. So I went and made the inroads, and then LNPS took it from there, and they gave us $1,000 so that we could do what's necessary for a site of this importance, I thought. So yeah, I'm John Michael, and here's the intro, and that's a beautiful prairie in the background. And I used to have this teaching shirt, and I always taught in it, and then I lost it, so now I'm in this shirt. I am on the Wildlife Federation board. I really try to be on it. And then I am a coordinator for the Old Growth Forest Network, which is pretty disjointed in our state, but I brought them here twice for a statewide field trip, and I've nominated forests in Arkansas and Tennessee and Mississippi and other places. So old growth is an important thing for me. I like something that's visibly intact, and old growth forests really present the opportunity to see intact ecosystems. This is Cliff and Laura Como. These are the owners of the property that I studied. How many of you went on that field trip today? Did you like it? Yeah. Good. Well, if I lie, don't say anything, okay? Shut up. Is anyone here to watch the presentation from the family? Ah, there we go. So the Como family likes to have spies, and so this is our resident spy. So if I cover my mouth like this, she can't see what I'm saying, okay? So don't let her see. No, actually, the Comos have been remarkable landowners, probably among the best I've ever had the opportunity to engage with. And what makes them remarkable is that Laura Como is a bulldog. I mean, an absolute tenacious, indefatigable bulldog. Now, she and I might differ about the truth that we discover, but she wants the truth and she cares about her property, and that is very rare. And so she's a standout person. I wanted to go to this property because I thought that it would be important to know the truth of it. So I'm going to talk about the property and the bridge that threatens it, investigations that came before mine, my study, my results, and then I'll try and put that in context for you about what it means. So their property sits here in a bend of the Mississippi River, just south of Baton Rouge. So Baton Rouge is right here, and this is kind of where the campus for LSU is. And this is Plaquemine Point, and this is Sunshine and St. Gabriel, and this highway divides their property, and their highway is an old Spanish land grant, or not Spanish necessarily, but a grant that runs outward from the center line of the point, as they typically do, in this long, skinny strip. And their property is threatened by this yellow line, which is the proposed path for a bridge, which would be a commuter's course from Baton Rouge over the river. And there are two other courses that lay south of it. Now, spoiler, both of those have old cypress forests on them too. So now the Comos have registered their property with the Natural Areas Registry, and the Natural Areas Registry says, this is a pretty cool property, we're going to track it at the state level. If anyone ever says, hey, got a cool cypress forest, they'll pull up in their database and say, yes, we do, you might want to go speak to the Comos. Another site like that exists on a different route. We didn't learn that until this year. It was forgotten about. This isn't supposed to happen. So the final route is mostly over good cypress land, but it's all corporate land. And so hopefully that will be the course, but we'll get into that in a moment. So this is what their land looks like on aerial. So Plaquemine Point has this big block of hardwood forest in the middle of it. And that block of hardwood forest is several hundred acres in size. Let us say 500 or 600 acres in size. And their property looks like this and sits near the center, and it ascends northward from LA 75. And their property is not shaped like this because this is a very stupid shape. This is the shape of my study area because I'm being a kind of a clinician here. I've determined that this little barren area, they used to call it the burn, and now I've learned that they're calling it the barren. This is different. I don't know what the hell's wrong with this thing, but it's different. And then this is a canal with an opening. It's about, I don't know, 70 feet wide, and it's mowed grass and exotics, and it's crap. This is bomb cratered, seismic testing, disturbance, former agricultural, different plant community, not the right stuff. So this 50 acres, almost exactly 50 acres, is my study site. And this is what it looks like on a LiDAR map. You can see that it's ridged and swaled, right? So the ridges and swales are running east-west. Now, those astute among you will notice that the river is not necessarily running east-west today. It's essentially running north and south. And at their point, it bends around Plaquemine Point, but it is unusual that it has ridges going this way because most of the natural levees today go the opposite way, and that's important. This is what it looks like in aspect. It's a very attractive forest with high cathedral canopies. The canopies do not typically exceed 100 feet. Roughly 100 feet is the cap, maybe 110. So not as tall as you might expect. I'm used to forests that are 130, 140 feet tall. So it's kind of a stunted bottomland, but it's a bottomland. Previous investigations are not poor, but they did not answer my questions, imagine that. And Harvey Stern here, a good buddy of mine, is the founder of the Louisiana Purchase Cypress Legacy Foundation. And the stated mission of that nonprofit is to find cypresses that predate the Louisiana Purchase. And this is just a pat on the back program. Good job, got a big tree, we love you. And I have done coring for him in my region, and now I sit on the board there. And we want to keep that going because we think it's a good support program to bring attention. Well, Harvey has been there, and with his typical trappings and biases, cored the largest, oldest trees to determine something about the age of the forest, and he found the trees are pretty old. And then LSU had this study, which this is a much cleaner graph than they presented in their poster, but they basically found this diameter distribution. This is in inches, this is 5 inches, and this is 60 inches at breast height. So these trees range from itty bitty, 5 inches in diameter, to 5 feet wide at chest height. And these are big cypress. And they have virtually no buttress. So when you're thinking about this, I code you to say above or below buttress, diameter breast height, diameter normal, okay? But they don't have buttress, they're just columnar. That's interesting, we'll explain why later. But I combined these two projects and came up with approximate ages for the trees across the site, but I won't share those yet. Okay, so their claims are these. It's a bald cypress forest, it's a wetland, it's a high quality natural area, and it's an old growth forest. That's what the Comos told me when I got there. That's what's written in the newspapers. These are their contentions for why it should not be damaged by a bridge. Now the bridge would not entirely destroy their site in a fell swoop, but it would impact many acres, let's say 5 or so, on the northwest corner and predispose the rest of it to damage. So it will impact it, I have no doubts about this. But I want to be clinical, and I want to not take any political perspective on this. I just asked, are these things true? Is this true? I can answer that. John Michael can find that out. So LNPS gave us $1,000 to develop these deliverables, a robust checklist of plants and animals. The animals are in parentheses because I like the plants better. I wanted to collect plot data on the vegetation. I wanted answers about the natural quality of the site, and I wanted to say something about the wetland dynamics without going too deep. And lastly, we agreed to public exposure. So we agreed to field trips or a talk, and you got both. So lucky y'all. $1,000 goes a long way. Okay, so here's some of the results in order. Yes?
I'm sorry to sidebar you real quick.
It's okay.
Just for appease my own ignorance. So, can the state or any other governing body dictate that they can provide any type of thoroughway or pass-through across privately owned land?
Yeah, that's called eminent domain.
Okay, so
Yes.
basically the issue here is that the state is claiming eminent domain to pass through their property.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's the issue.
Thank you. I apologize.
No problem. It's always nice to understand how your government can screw you. I'm glad to enlighten you about this. Remember that the Leviathan is a compromise, everyone. So So on to the plant checklist. So how do we glean this plant checklist? I have visited the site, I don't know, 5 or 6 times, 4 or 5 times. And Brian Early and Chris Doffett, both respected botanists, have been. Botany interns have been. The landowners are not slouches. We've used iNaturalist. I've collected vouchers. It is not a fully vouchered checklist, but I have over 155 species of vascular plants recorded out of the 50 acres. Now, okay, maybe that sounds like a lot. Larry Raymond and I wrote a flora of 150 acres that had 640 something species. So you can have a lot more species per unit area in a particular habitat, but this habitat is inundated every year because of the ridges and swales. Not a lot of it is constant growing space, and who the hell are we to dictate what rich is for a particular habitat? I'll tell you, this is pretty normal. We know that it's not a beat up trash flora because we found 2 state rare plants. We found Houghtonia inflata, floating banana or some stupid name, and silly. And this is a highly unusual plant that after the talk, if you want to hear about it, I'd be glad to tell you. And we also found Corydalus flavula. I collected this for the first time in about 40 years in Louisiana. Both of these plants are out of expectation here. Houghtonia had never been seen east of the river in Louisiana, and Corydalus flavula has never been seen in a habitat like this. It's usually an obligate, rich, loamy hill species. Think trillium, bloodroot, cutleaf toothwort. It's a really rich plant. The Corydalus is in the Fumariaceae. It's like a maybe it's called a fumwort. They're little red flowers that grow in horticulture. And then Houghtonia is a primulaceous plant. And oh yeah, can't you tell that? Stupid plant. So importantly, look, it looks like a banana and it floats. Okay, that's all we need to know. Okay. So of those, more than 40 are woody plants that are native to the region, so that's good. It definitely has a good dendroflora. And 90% of them, about, are native species. This is intriguing because I draw the line for a natural remnant of high quality at 10% exotic. If it has more than 10% exotic, it's probably not a good quality remnant unless it just has a bunch of species and there's just, ample opportunity. It is... Oh, yellow fumewort? Yellow fumewort, yes. I'm sorry. They really don't, it doesn't have a good common name, and I'm not good at that. So it is beautiful. There's another one, Corydalus micrantha, which grows on roadsides. Maybe it's called like butter and eggs or something like this. And see, oh, you all know that one. Okay, of course. Butter and eggs and floating bananas. So a comparable site, Ben-Hur, on LSU's property is being studied in parallel by Dr. Christopher Reed, a colleague and friend of mine. And it's also an old site. And most people have been to the farm to bird, but they haven't been into the woods. The woods are qualifiably old growth. And those woods contain 180 species, where we have 155, but it's 150 acres instead of 50. And we share over 100 species. So basically they're the same community at macro scale. Okay, how did I glean information about the vegetation? The vegetation can tell me more about what kind of community this is. Although that looks like bald cypress swamp or bottomland hardwood, I'm not really certain until I do the numbers. And so I took plots, 10 of them, stratified, 5 on ridges, 5 on swales or sloughs, and I sampled the entire group and then looked at them individually across the stratification. I started with a 1/4 acre circular plot. All of you who do plot sampling will remember that circular plots are easier to establish and rediscover, but harder to sample. So we have one stake in the ground that hopefully will last for 10 or more years, and they can resample it in the future, like after the bridge goes in, right? So that's why I selected this protocol. None of the plots will be destroyed by the bridge. So you'll be able to track the changes without destruction of the plots, okay? And then we have embedded in that a 1/100th acre plot that is useless. I threw it out because the shrub data was so sparse that while I had 10 plots, it suggested I needed 218 to give a strong pattern of error. I was not willing to share the statistical data gained there, so just throw out the shrub plot. It's because it's so patchy and you would need so many plots to capture the variability, so forget that plot. But it was there. And then I set off from the center a 1,000th acre herb plot. And that plot was very revealing. I sampled it once in the spring, but I'm a pretty good botanist, so I can see the plants that are going to occur the rest of the year. And I think that that one sampling was sufficient. The plants don't seem to change throughout the year, really. And then I cored one tree in theory, but that didn't actually happen. We ran into trouble there. They would only let me core 10 trees. So Harvey has cored about, 16 trees on their property, or very near their property, almost touching it. And I was going to get to core 10 more. They're very sensitive landowners. They didn't want me to use paint. They want their property to look natural, and they don't want to damage it. And I like that. I'm okay with that. It's new. It's a challenge to me, but that's okay. That reverence is appreciated. So I was going to core one tree per plot. This is important because Harvey biased his sample. He chose the big old trees. I want to know what the average tree is like. I don't care anything about his biggest, oldest trees. The biggest, oldest tree tells me the last time it was reset to 0. I know that was a long time ago. I want to know the last time it was damaged or reset slightly or has experienced disturbance. And we still don't know that. So here you go. I know this is what you're waiting for, is a big pie chart. This is the combined plot data for my understory plots. And they show about 10 species per plot. And these plots are roughly 5 feet in radius. So you can imagine a 10-foot wide circle. 10 species per plot. 41 species captured in all 10 of them, 10 total, of which 3 were exotic. So that's pretty darn good. That's less than our 10%. This is a good ground flora. It was composed of some interesting critters, which I will discuss by habitat. So here are the ridge plots. They are dominated by sticky willy. Hold up, bear with me. Sticky willy, baby blue eyes, barren strawberry, and big seed forget-me-not. Those are like our top 4. But, and dewberry. But everything on the right-hand side of the chart follows the 50-20 rule of dominance. So those are the species which make up 50% of all the frequency and presence. Everything else in the other category does not together equal 50%. So it's just a statistical cut to say this is less important, okay? It doesn't actually mean anything. What you should understand is there was a lot of different plants sharing dominance. Not one thing is strongly dominant. This is a very well-settled habitat. Older, better habitats are like that. New lawns are dominated by 1 or 2 grasses. Old lawns are evenly mixed with 10 or 15 species. That's a good way to think about it. So this is sticky willy, for those who asked. Galium apirini. This is baby blue eyes, Nemophylla aphylla. And this is a barren strawberry. This picture is not from the site. Actually, I think that the species that occurs there is probably Potentilla hebiishigo, as opposed to Potentilla indica, but this is a trivial matter. There's a bunch of, well, we don't know. We think it's not native, but it was first collected here in the 1860s. So that's pretty early for an exotic plant, and this plant is in really good habitats. So I don't think we know everything about that. But these are all weedy natives, if native at all. The slough plots are different. The slough plots are dominated by butterweed, pink smartweed, cottonmouth grass, buckwheat vine, okay, all those you don't know. And so here's butterweed, Pachyra glabella. Here's Persicaria bicornis, which is pink smartweed. And this is Phanopyrum gymnocarpon. I was saying today in the lecture at Chico that cottonmouth grass is aptly named. It's an obligate wetland plant. Definitely always where the cottonmouths are in my experience. So these are the 3 plants you would see in the sloughs. And there are indicator species that only occur in one or the other habitat. So on the ridges, you get those species on the left, but they're absent from the sloughs completely. On the right, you get the slough species that are absent from the ridges. Again, this is a sign of an intact, deep, old system because you put them in a shaker sifter and you shook them around and they settled in the place that they prefer. That's what's supposed to happen. So that's climax. Okay, this is the results from my tree research. Remember, this is at a 1/4 acre scale. And this is across the ridges and the sloughs. You can see that sugarberry, cypress, and red maple are the top species. And they together make up, whatever this is, 72 plus 65 plus 31, that's like 165, roughly, 170. They make up 170 out of 300 of the importance index points. So what that means is if we combine the density per acre, the diameter, and the frequency in plots, like 1 out of how many plots had this, We can combine those three metrics into one metric called the importance index. And this importance index evens out all the variability. Sure, it's a plant that you see a lot of, but every one of them is this big. And you only see 100 of them in this plot and none in another plot. So this is an averaging tool, okay? The point with 50-20, again, the composition being 50% of the total, 170 is over 150, which is half of 300. That tells us where to draw the artificial line on these being the dominant species. So remember, it's supposed to be a Cypress Tupelo swamp, and already our top 3 species include 2 species which are not Tupelo or Cypress. So that's interesting. You can also see that some of these have really high basal area or average diameters. The Cypress is average 27 inches in diameter, so that's right here. However, that is not the quadratic mean diameter, meaning it is not the tree whose diameter is representative of the average basal area per tree from the basal area of that species per acre. Get that? So this is not an acceptable answer to the forester. I don't like this answer, but this is the way that people understand. This is how big the average tree is. There are actually a lot bigger trees in this average, so that the average has strong skew. And if you put it adjusted for skew, the average diameter is within ½ an inch of what the LSU study found. So very, very close, around 30-something inches, 32 inches, so bigger. And the overall dominance across ridges and sloughs looks like this. So sugarberry, way dominant. Cypress, close second. Red maple and water tupelo follow that, and then it descends cascading from there. This is surprising because sugarberry and cypress are usually in different locations. Sugarberry is wet, a wet species, but it doesn't have to be drowned. Bald cypress can handle being drowned. So they're not usually growing side by side on sites that I've read about, and the literature backs me up on that. That's not a normal finding. This is what the ridges look like. You can see cypress and sugarberry, shared again. And this is what the sloughs look like, the swales. They have water tupelo as the dominant, cypress as the close second, but look how abundant sugarberry is in this flooded slough. And my slough plots are well placed. They're in the slough. So this is interesting. You also pick up things like black willow and the only tallow in the study are being in the sloughs. But the red maple's still very dominant there too. Well, let's try a different cut. Let's start with those trees which are greater than 10 inches in diameter at breast height and move up. So if we start there, already we have 3 dominants instead of red maple, we've traded out water tupelo. I should have said, my initial cut was at 4 inches. So if we jump up to 10, we get rid of a lot of the red maple. Well, now we're getting closer to a Cypress tupelo swamp. Let's go up to 20 inches. Okay, now that is a Cypress tupelo swamp. And beyond that size, it continues to be Cypress tupelo. Another interesting feature of this forest is that it has the negative exponential curve with hiccups, which is diagnostic of old growth. So old growth forests have trees of all sizes and ages, and so they descend in a cascade from left to right with more and more rare and fewer surviving members of older cohorts, but a lot of regeneration to fill in their place. And that's, it just gets winnowed out over time, right? But there should be humps, because in a perfect world where we don't live, it would be an even experience. That's not how it works. When trees blow over in the forest, you get hiccups. And so there are hiccups present. So this is a forest that's being acted upon by natural disturbance features. So this is what you would expect in old growth. However, it is not what is best representative of the forest in total. This tells a lie because a lot of these trees are never going to make it to be big. Even though there are state champion size red maples that are 40-something inches in diameter, that's not the normal per acre trend. So here's what it looks like when you look at cypress. This is basically a bell curve. So if it was even aged and most of the trees had originated at a single point, we would see a bell curve around the point of their origin. And that's basically what we see here. This is just a statistical fluke, okay? So this is even aged as opposed to uneven aged, right there, right? This is even aged. And tupelo basically shows the same pattern. These trees I looked at carefully are from the wettest plots. So I think they're just really, really stressed. They're just not growing as fast. Those are even aged. They originated at the same time in a singular event, or perhaps multiple singular events, but in pulses. These are the distributions of the diameters of red maple, negative exponential, uneven age, trees of all ages and sizes, and sugarberry, negative exponential, descending, trees of all ages and sizes. What I gleaned from this, in correlation with my coring data, which I'll lay out here, is that the old growth trees are in a structural condition typical of old growth, and the hardwood trees are in a condition typical of old growth. The cypress and tupelos are not. They're in a condition where they have not broken up their cohorts, and given time, they will break up their cohorts. Now, a cypress cohort can live for 3,000 years, so it's not going to break up fast, and maybe we can't expect that. But most cypress swamps have 2, 3, 4, or more cohorts. So this is a bit unusual. I will break that down a little bit here, but I'm still not confident there are multiple cohorts here. So this is slightly odd. So lending to the question of is it old growth or not, the hardwoods are in an old growth condition. They're pretty dang old, and they look old. The cypress still look very youthful and young. Okay, so trying to core, every single tree I tried to core was hollow. Every single tree that Harvey tried to core was hollow. I've cored on dozens of sites and hundreds of trees, not thousands. I've never been to a site that I couldn't get at least one pith hit, or a tree whose radial increment conveyed more than the pre-settlement, more than the settlement period. So like, I know the area was settled 200 years ago, I at least got 200 years. So I've never been able to, I never failed to trace back the lineage of a forest beyond settlement when I thought it was old. So this is a failure on my part. And we cored some big trees, all the way from 16 inches in diameter up to 57 inches in diameter. So really big trees, okay? We found that they had relatively consistent growth rates within species. So the cypress are ranging from 8 rings per inch, very fast for a cypress, up to 21 rings per inch. So in radial growth, I would count 21 rings in a given inch. I have a core in my car I forgot to bring here. But suffice it to say, this is not slow. Cypress trees sometimes grow at 60 rings per inch. So this is normal, good cypress growth. They're not hurting. Tupelo was younger than expected, and so was Nuttall oak. But I'm sure that this is just poor representation because the trees are very hollow. You see at the bottom, I have a warning. 7 to 50% of the radius was represented by our cores. So our best core got halfway to the pith in the center of the tree. Very, very hollow. Margaret Duvall, an old growth researcher, and I talked about this, and we think that it's probably because of the wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry. Sites that remain inundated or remain dry are typically more resilient. I think they suffer from dry rot in addition to molds and fungus, which can sporulate in these dry periods. But we don't know any of that. So how old is it? Well, you can see when I reduce my ages, I get ranges from 54 up to 309 years old. These are very conservative ages. In the past, my ages have been right. We test this by taking a good core and then pretending we can't see the last little bit of it and measuring the outermost portion and then guessing about the inside and seeing if we're right. And I get pretty close like this with cypress. So this is a good guess, but we don't know how far off it is. I can tell you that the average age peaks at 2 points. The first is in the 1850 to 1900 period. Another peak dates back to the 1700s to 1750. And this is interesting. Watch both of their ages cascade. The recruitment periods are punctual, and recruitment decreased after 2 disturbance events. That's my guess. I think there are 2 ages. Most of the trees are 160-ish. Older trees are 300-ish, okay? That's my guess. Can't prove it. What about the soil? Which soil does my sample in the middle look most like? The one on the left or the one on the right? I'm sorry, it should say Sharkey sample and then Dowling is the right. So which one do you think? Left or right? The right. Unfortunately, the Department of Transportation wetland report, which considered this not a wetland site on the ridges, says that it is Sharkey. And I initially agreed with them, but when I core, I find that it aligns with Dowling. And Dowling is a hydric soil, so it is a wetland soil. Most of their wetland criteria failed because it had the plants, it passed the fact neutral test, it had the soil, like it has features of redox and evidence that it gets wet, but it did not have the evidence of hydrology. Sure, it used to get wet. Sure, it got wet often enough to grow these plants, but does it still get wet so that I can see evidence of that at the surface in crawfish mounds and leaf mold and water lines and stuff like this? That's the failing point right there. And it barely failed. Some of them probably passed, but for the time being, the Department of Transportation considers the ridges not wetlands. Well, that's half the site, so something to think about. So evidently the Department of Transportation is having difficulty reading soil. The barren area that I showed you on the map in the very beginning, when I went there with a core sampler, I found that it did not look clean and tidy like this with simple horizons. The top 6 or 8 inches were all mixed up. There were lumps of clay mixed in with topsoil, mixed in with debris. I suspect it was tilled. I don't know that for sure, but I suspect it was tilled. It may have been brined because it just will not grow plants. The only thing it grows are facultative halophytes like Persicaria. So I think it has salt in it, but I won't know until the results come back this week. This is what it looks like in the morning. Isn't that beautiful? So this is an example of a ridge, and this is an example of a slough, and this is a shallow slough with a lot of vegetative cover. Notice this one has a lot of open water. Okay, so let's talk about that. I judged 2 metrics for the flora. The first of them is whether it was made up of conservative species, species which do not tolerate much disturbance. So 10 is really awesome, obligate to high quality natural areas. Plants can't move, so it indicates that site's pretty cool. Or 0, trash sidewalk weed. 5 is it's never been reset to 0, but it could have been beat up a lot and that plant could still be there, okay? You want it to be in the 3.5 plus range. 3.5 plus is considered unmitigable by the inventors of this program. Okay, here's what ours looks like.
3.5 plus is considered
Unmitigable. By Gerald Wilhelm, who invented the C values.
like what purpose would it be mitigated?
Oh, you might want to see if it is possible to create restoration plantings which match the quality of natural areas. And we...
It's too natural already. So it's above a threshold. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yes, let me say that more concisely. Scientists have arrived at the conclusion that a mean C value of 3.5 in a complex assemblage of plants is unattainable by human hands. It is a natural feature. The presence of such high conservatism is indicative of a remnant habitat. Can't be attained. So you can see ours is pretty high. It's in the low 4 range, and some of them are 8s, 7s, 8s. Most sites will not contain 6, 7s, 8s. This would be like big blue stem, Silphium, Liatris. Some of these are 6, 7s, 8s. Houtonia is a 10, definitely, but it doesn't even register on here. So Houtonia definitely belongs. So it is a conservative flora. Now, is it a wetland flora? Because they claim it's a wetland. Well, you can see at the lowest point, there may not be many species which grow because there's too long of a hydro period. At the highest point, you get mostly trees, and all across the catena from top to bottom, you'll have increasingly smaller life forms, all the way down to duckweed, one of our smallest flowering plants on Earth. And so when I looked at the upland, facultative, meaning wet or dry, wet, and obligate wetland plants, I found this distribution. So it passes the neutral test in that most of the plants are slightly to the wetland side, like 3.6 or something. So if it was 3 right down the middle, it would be 50-50 wetland and not. Theirs is to the wetland side. So the plants tell us it's a wetland. Okay, I yelled at you a whole bunch. Let me tell you my genesis story now. What the hell is going on with this site? It's 160 something years old. It predates most settlement in the area, but not all of it. It's really intact. I may not have mentioned it, but there is no evidence of timber harvest. There's no stumps, there's no ruts, there's no roads. When I thought I saw stump holes, I would find blown over trees that break my rules about what stump holes are supposed to look like in bottomlands, and the star shapes are absent, and I have no evidence this site was cut. I'm a stickler. How then did it come into existence and attain this age? From a topo map, you may not realize, as I did not, with a contour interval of 10 feet, that this is a giant basin. The whole middle of the point, unlike most points on the Mississippi River, quite rare on the landscape, is a hole, almost 10 feet deep, 9. It ranges from 19 feet at the edge, which is the highest point, the lowest point at which they will give you insurance. So there's no farming today below this point. And it's intact, the forest is below this point. all the way up to like 27 feet up here in the natural levee. And so it's a big naturally levied basin that used to have overbank flooding for a long time. You can see how the forest pattern pretty neatly lines up. And you can see the ridges and swales expressed in the photo running this way. So hydrology is affecting the overstory cover. This is a map from the turn of the 20th century. I think the date is like 1903. But if you look, the actual survey date is in the 1800s. So this has always been a wet hole with swamp forest that hasn't been used for agriculture for a long time. Mostly it was getting overbank flooding and it was coming out this little bayou right here. This bayou has now been channelized, but the height of the channel's edge, 19 feet. So it still doesn't affect the drainage of the site very much. It does alter it, but not completely. So it's still wetland capable. Okay, I think that when this site was flooded regularly, it was living in this zone. And I think that on the ridges, you would have gotten a few trees, especially old cypress trees. So on the adjacent properties, there are these big, fat-bottomed, wide-based, big buttress, skinny top, maybe 600-year-old cypress trees, not very far from their property. These, to my mind, are lake-grown cypress. I think this was a giant lake, a seasonal lake that held water for so long every year that it could not be inhabited by most tree species. But the seed source was there in these 600-year-old cypress. I think in the 1880s, 70s, 80s, 90s, we increased our levees and dikes and canals so fantastically that we stopped the overbank flooding forever. And I think that as it dried, that old cohort seeded in ridge and swale, edge to edge, even where they don't belong up by the sugarberries, and soon the hardwoods infiltrated in between the cypress, and that's how you get this hodgepodge overstory community, but a relatively natural cover. This is important timing that it originated in the 1880s, 70s, because not only does the age line up, but that would have put it too small to be commercial during the lumber boom. So these trees were too small to be cut. And indeed, the Comos have a bill claiming their timber volume, which is not massive, and we have no evidence that that deed, that timber deed, was ever acted upon. We think it just expired. If it had not expired, it would not have regrown to the point that we see today. It's not possible. And there would be stumps, because stumps are evident for 100 plus years with cypress trees. So I think it was a big giant lake, and then we changed the hydrology, and that's how we got an even age cohort of mixed wetland and facultative species. I could be wrong about this. Regardless, I'm quite certain it's 160 years old and very undisturbed. I find that it has cypress tupelo overstory with more sugarberry and red maple than would be expected, possibly entering during disturbance periods and mostly being in the smaller sizes. Think Hurricane Andrew, for example. It is a wetland with a diverse mix of facultative species mixed in because of changes in hydrology. And it is a remnant natural area with a diverse flora and many conservative species, which is unmitigable in its current form. I had to read that verbatim. I don't think you can get this thing back. It is borderline old growth. About 200 years is the mark for old growth on bald cypress. So this poses an interesting problem, and I'll wrap up with this. With sites like this, they were created by a mix of anthropogenic and natural forces. We're not going to get sites like this back because the natural features which predispose them are erased. This site is one step down from what I would typically consider a virgin forest. A virgin forest need not necessarily be old growth, but it has to be originated by completely unmeddled means, has to be completely natural in its origin. So if an earthquake created a lake in Arkansas and today it's inhabited by barely 200-year-old trees, that's virgin. It may not be old growth, but it's unmitigable because we can't get it back. This blurs that line. Those levees were built by us, but that basin has been there for a long, long time and could have been cut off in any number of other ways. And so I think this site conveys a ticking clock. The natural sites and the semi-natural sites are getting more and more fuzzy. If we want to appreciate the natural sites for what they are, we have to identify them very quickly, because 160 years old is impressive today, but it won't be 50 years from now when our preserves and parks have been allowed to grow since the ecological revolution. So I think this is a very good, poignant case study that puts fire under us to keep looking for those truly special old sites, which I count this one among them. Any questions?